Thank you all, and very happy New Year to everybody. So I'm going to guess that a lot of you are like ISU and Richland that Kirsten teaches with, and you're not quite back in session yet. So again, today's going to be or the next hour together. It's not the whole day. The next hour together will be a great opportunity for us to have some dialogue, talk about things that we found that has worked, talk about some resources and what the research says has worked, and then also really be here as a resource for you. ICSPS, just a little footnote there. We are a professional development center at Illinois State University. For those of you who have not encountered us before, we work to develop toolkits, we develop strategies, we do professional development, the Forum for Excellence, all of those great things that we do to support the CTE system across the state. So we are funded by the Illinois Community College Board. And we just really enjoy engaging with the system, but we are definitely a resource for the system. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speaker, and Kirsten, I'll introduce you if you want to go to your next slide there. So Kirsten Bear is our speaker today. She is the Digital Communications Manager at ICSPS, so she's worked with our center since 2020. One of the things that makes her ideal for providing this presentation is not only does she teach online, she's also the Digital Communications Manager, but she's had to really pivot as she entered in with ICSPS. So she started, and you're all going to get a nice giggle out of this, because she started in March, early March of 2020. She got to be in the office all of 2 weeks, and then we entirely went remote. So she has really done her whole job over the last 2 years as a remote employee. So she does have a lot of experience to what she's talking about. And then that's her email there. So if you do have questions, that's the other thing with ICSPS. I'll put my email in the chat, and Brittany's with us today, and I'll introduce her in a second. And we'll put our emails there in the chat if you'd like, if you have questions, if there's things you think about later, or maybe if you're on campus and you're driving home, or maybe you're going to go drive to pick up the kids tonight or do something. You think something, you know, I want to ask about that, or hey, I want to hear more about that. Send us an email, because we are here to, as I said, as a resource. Also with us today is Brittany Boston. Brittany is our Associate Director for Equity and Outreach at ICSPS, and many of you have seen her through the TIPS curriculum, and also through all kinds of stuff with Special Pops. So we are your center here, and with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Kirsten to get us started.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. So like Amy said, I am the Digital Communications Manager for our center. So I do a lot of work online, as we all have been. I do a lot of instructional training similar to what we're going to be doing here today online. And then I also have taught over the last 4 years, both virtually and in person, and now in a hybrid format as well. So I have experience in all three pedagogical practices, I guess. So we're kind of gonna like lay the land for some online practices today. We're gonna have some opportunities for dialogue, and we're gonna have a great time. So first I wanted to start off with just a little bit of research, just to give us some background knowledge. So this is a study that identifies the need and the wants of our students moving forward into this pandemic, because we're not out of it yet, right? We're still in the midst of it. And this study was presented by and put on by the Digital Learning Pulse survey. It's an ongoing research project. I'm not sure if you've heard of it or not, but it's really interesting. And it's been going on throughout the pandemic. Its main point is to understand how the pandemic is changing higher education. And this was published in April of 2021. It was published in December of 2021 and put on in April of 2021. It is the fourth in a series of surveys published by Bayview Analytics in partnership with Cengage, the Association of Community College Trustees, the Online Learning Consortium, and the Higher Education Research and Development Institute. Mouthful, I know, but just letting you know that it is credible information. So basically what this survey found was that it surveyed a little over 1,200 community college teaching faculty. They surveyed a little over 800 academic administrators, and they surveyed about 2,200 students who were registered at a U.S. community college for both fall 2020 and spring 2021. Students are more satisfied. The study found overall that students are more satisfied with in-person learning, but they want that flexibility. So I feel like that's no surprise to us, right? We know that there are disconnects between teaching digitally online, But there are so many positives as well, and our students are craving that. So yes, our students want all of that in-person activity, and they're more satisfied with that, at least according to this survey, but they still want that flexibility for their lives. And students who are taking in-person only courses were more likely to give their learning experience an A, and that was 59% of the students that they surveyed, compared to students in online courses, which was 44%, and then those in hybrid courses, which was 49%. So we do find that our students did have a more A learning experience in an in-person classroom. However, students are taking only in-person courses reported more problems with work and technology. So even though they might prefer that, they reported more problems in that in-person module. And then this tells us that our want from our students is to provide some sort of online instruction moving forward. Because currently, I know a lot of you are in person again, right? You've either gone back in person a while ago, or you're starting to, or maybe you've been back and forth. Maybe your institution doesn't really know what's happening right now. I can relate. But we do know from this survey and from other research and just from your own personal experiences, I think we could all agree that our students want some sort of online digital aspect to our classrooms moving forward out of this pandemic. The traditional classroom is no longer really applicable. And so another interesting study that was put on by the American College Health Association National College Health Assessment was that within the last 12 months of the pandemic, so this was 2020, spring 2020 to spring 2021, 87% felt overwhelmed by all that they had to do in terms of their classwork. 70.8% of our students felt sad, described themselves feeling sad. 65.7% described themselves feeling overwhelming anxiety. Over half indicated more than average to tremendous stress. Over half felt that academics were traumatic and very difficult to handle. So our students are probably feeling a lot like how we are feeling. As professionals, now that we've been almost 2 years over, coming up on 2 years or 3 years, coming up on 3 years of the pandemic, our student work as professionals kind of maybe, we found our way or we found our niche in some capacity, or, we're holding on, but our students might not quite be there, or some students are and other students aren't. And so this is where these negative feelings are coming out of. And so I want to focus today on moving forward. I know we're still in the pandemic, but I'm looking forward and I want to focus on the benefits of online instruction moving into the future and what that really provides for our students and how to bridge that gap. So, there are benefits to online instruction and there are benefits to in-person instruction, and there are ways to help bridge the gap. And that's what we're really going to focus on today, because that's where I see our future. I don't see the digital component, and our center does not see the digital component. I think you could all agree with me that the digital component of our classrooms is not going anywhere. It is the way of the future. It is the way of the workforce, and we are moving forward with it. And so the benefits of online instruction, as we all know, is that flexibility, really providing that flexibility, allowing new ways to collaborate, getting to know our students better in a not so easy environment, creating greater engagement and learning, being more efficient with our time, and creating that enriching experience. All of these are, benefits of online instruction and can be done with online instruction. I recently listened to a webinar where the speaker made a great point, and it really resonated with me. And it's that from this point, from like pre-pandemic, prior to, education focused on the student coming to us, the student making time for us, making time for the classroom, the student reconstructing their life, or, fitting education or fitting school or fitting classes into their lives. And we really need to change our mindset in education to this aspect or this idea of meeting the students where they're at and moving forward, even catering to our students and going to them. And online instruction allows that opportunity for us in greater capacities than we probably even realize, and it's only going to continue. And so I want to focus on bridging the gap. So really, how do we do that? How are you guys doing that? That's what we're going to talk about today. we're going to share all of our tips and tricks and, what I've done, what Amy's done, but you guys are the experts. And so we want to give you the opportunity for dialogue too, because I think we learn best from our peers. At least I do. And you all are my peers. I teach at Richland Community College, and I'm teaching, in all three formats. So bridging that gap, how do we bridge the gap between connecting with our students, having that humanistic perspective, creating those relationships, and providing digital instruction in some capacity, whatever that looks like for you at your institution. Maybe you're in person a couple days a week, maybe you're online a couple days a week, maybe you have in-person classes that are shorter, more spread out, smaller students and smaller amounts of students in your classroom. And then you also have a digital component as well. Maybe you're solely online, whatever that looks like for you. We're going to try to bridge that gap. So first I wanted to define pedagogy for us. And so those of you who might not be familiar with the term, if you're more from, the workforce side of the workforce and you didn't start off in education, at least that's how I am. I kind of found my way into education now. So the heart of teaching is that it is the rules and principles that guide effective and efficient activities which lead to learning. And that's how we define pedagogy. It's that heart of teaching. And so it's this big philosophical word, can't speak today, right? And it does rely heavily on educational psychology, which encompasses scientific theories of learning and to some extent on the philosophy of education, all of those things. But, we've been doing online instruction because we've had to up until this point, and moving forward, you can really take the time to change your pedagogy, change your pedagogical practices to figure out what works best for you as we're moving forward. And so these are the different pedagogical approaches that I want to focus on today. And if you're not familiar with these, we're going to learn something new together. But these are the pedagogical approaches that are, best utilized by our current students. And so the first one is constructivist. So this allows learners to be active in the process of constructing meaning and knowledge rather than passively receiving information. So this is really something that I utilize in my classroom by having those discussions, fosters critical thinking and provides learners with a learning environment that helps them connect with their learnings. Then we have collaborative, which this involves groups of learners working together to solve a problem, complete a task, or create a product. So if you have your students, work together on a project, if you have your students work together on a science project, a math project, a welding project, etc. Integrated approach, the integrated pedagogical approach is this goal to enable the learner to master those situations he or she will have to deal with in his or her professional and or private life. So really providing that pedagogy that connects the dots for our students between what they've learned as a student into becoming a specialist in their field. And then inquiry-based approach is to establish a culture where ideas are respectfully challenged and tested, redefined, and viewed as improbable, moving students from a position of wondering to a position of enacted understanding and further questioning. So not only are we giving our students that base knowledge, we're teaching our students everything that we know in an inquiry approach, but we are providing them with the framework to move on and be able to still, continue to add to their backpack of knowledge because we're providing them with those critical thinking skills and framework. And then the reflective approach is to look at what the teacher and the learners do in the classroom and think about what they do and analyze about if it works. So this is really where you would process, and do some self-evaluation, some self-observation to what you've done in the past, even now, even if we've been teaching online this whole pandemic, right? Let's start fresh. Let's move forward with our pedagogy and do some self-evaluation, do some self-observation to understand what we've done thus far in the pandemic, online and virtually and digitally, that's worked and what we need to adjust. So I kind of want to know from you all, what pedagogical approach do you feel you've chosen or you tend to choose when teaching, or if you haven't begun teaching yet, or maybe you've just started teaching, what approach would you like to choose to teach by? So we have constructivist, collaborative, integrated, inquiry, and reflective. I don't know why I can't say that word today, everybody.
I was having trouble with plasticity this morning, so it's okay. Just to let you guys know, I did post the PDF of the slide deck because we had some people asking for that. We will be sharing not only the slide deck, but also the recording following the session. And all of those things can be found on our website, and I'll put that link in the chat as well.
Great, thank you, Amy. So just to kind of refresh again, constructivist allows learners to be active in the process of constructing that meaning. You know, collaborative, we're allowing our learners to be collaborative in their tasks. Integrated, we're really having that integrated approach, providing learners with that learning environment that helps them make connections of their learning across the curriculum. Inquiry-based approach is to provide our students with that framework and then give them the tools to be able to inquire further and build upon it. And then reflective approach is where we really self-evaluate and kind of, you know, adjust our pedagogy as we move along. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So most of you say that you provide, or you would like to choose, or you tend to choose, or however you answer this question, a more collaborative pedagogical approach, which I tend to do that too. I think, you know, students working in groups, whether it's online, because we have breakout rooms with Zoom now and everything, or whether it's, you know, in person or that hybrid format, it's really that peer engagement. So I like that collaborative pedagogy approach as well in my classroom. And then constructivist, some of you chose that one, and then integrated as well. So I also try, you know, my goal when my students leave my classroom, so I teach public speaking. My goal when my students leave my classroom isn't to have my student be able to get up in front of the whole, you know, United States of America, be the president of the United States and give a speech, or, you know, speak on that level. That's not my goal as a teacher. My goal isn't even for them to be able to give, you know, a 100% speech in my class by the end of the semester. My goal is to provide them with the framework that they have to know how to write a good speech and be able to continue to work on their presenting skills as they move forward past my class. It's only one semester, right, that we have with them. So thank you so much for participating in that poll. So our pedagogical approaches, they tend to be teacher-centered approach or student-centered approach. And so what I want to discourage us from is the teacher-centered approach. We are really moving out of that in the field of education, especially in the collegiate level. I think, you know, in K through 12, they were already moving out of it, but now on the collegiate level, we are truly moving out of it. We no longer just get to lecture, right? We no longer just get to have, you know, 200, I mean, none of you have this, right? But 200 students or 30 students or 20 students just come to our class and all we do is lecture. We don't really have that luxury anymore. We really need to develop this student-centered approach, that inquiry-based learning, cooperative learning approach, where we have a facilitator, a personal model, and a delegator. And with cooperative learning, we have the facilitator and the delegator. So the student-centered approach kind of looks like this. You know, we want our students to be able to think like an expert, you know, be involved in the community, take our things outside of our classroom and be involved in the community, be able to see the content that we're providing them from multiple perspectives, be able to have that balanced lifestyle. That's when I talk about like meeting students where they're at. Our students, as you all know, are dealing with so many things and we can be as accommodating as we possibly can, but we want them to be able to have those skills as well. Constructing their own plan, job placement. You know, we want to focus on giving our students those skills to go from student to specialist, whether that starts and ends with our class, or whether it starts with our class and then they continue on in their education and they build upon that. And providing them context with real life, you know, application as well, is something that I really focus on as an instructor. So when I was moving from teaching my course content all in person with, you know, minimal digital components, email, things like that. Most of my digital components were just communication, to moving on to having to produce both all four of these P's of teaching, having to produce my presence digitally, having to produce my process digitally, virtually online. how having to produce my product and my performance, the 4 P's of teaching, all online. So first I want to focus on presence. And, you guys might be experts at this now. Developing our presence in our classroom. The very first thing we do in the classroom is develop our presence, whether it's virtually or in person. And it's something that really worries a lot of us as instructors. I know it was something I was worried about when moving to a virtual environment. And it really shouldn't be something that worries you, because you really have no expectation to meet other than to just truly be who you already are as a professional. So some people worry based on some experiences they've had previously, movies you've seen about what a teacher should do or act like or talk like, whatever. But the best thing you can do is just take a minute and reflect on your personality and presence in the place of business that you work now. So whether that is education, or whether you come from welding or automotive or accounting or the medical field, wherever it is that you're coming from, that you're now teaching this course, you already have that professionalism. And really the biggest difference between how you act in your place of work as opposed to in the classroom, and really the difference between how, even if you come from education, the difference between how you act in your institution and then directly in the classroom with your students, the main difference is that hierarchy. And it's really a tough thing to get through, the difference in the hierarchy, because in our institution's models of hierarchy, it makes more sense because it's really part of our organization's process that keeps the organization running. Whether it's you're in the medical field, again, welding, automotive, accounting, computers, if you're coming from education, even in your institution, there's a hierarchy, right, that we all are aware of. And in a classroom, there is already that inherent hierarchy that's been presented because we have the teacher and we have the students, right? And this inherent hierarchy that's already established doesn't really work in our favor. If I'm the teacher, I hold all the cards. And especially when we're working with students who aren't, I work with students who are older than me. And so developing that hierarchy can sometimes be challenging. And having that inherent hierarchy in place doesn't always work in my favor. But I hold all the cards, right? I hold the students' grades. I hold all the knowledge of the map to where this class is going. I hold all the control over the speed as to how we get to where we want to go in the class. And so I am, the joker in the card deck. I hold all the cards. So if I'm the student, my first thing when I come to class and when I'm establishing my presence as a student is, do I arrive early? Can I arrive just on time? Where do I go? Where do I sit? Do I need a computer? Do I need to be on 5 minutes before the professor starts their Zoom? Or do I need to wait so that the professor doesn't catch me in there early because, I don't want to be called on, or I don't want to be asked a question that I don't know, or I don't want to be prompted to conversate with the instructor outside of that classroom setting. All of these things are our presence that our students are feeling. And so there's this inherent hierarchy that we have as teachers. And so how do we establish that presence with our students? How do you do it? So for example, something that I do is that I always arrive 15 minutes early to my Zoom. Well, I try to. Sometimes it's only 5 minutes. I try to play music when I turn my unmute on. I try to play music. I have my camera on right away. So that way, if my students do want to come in early, just like they would in an in-person environment, they can ask me a question and they can feel free to do that. I make myself presentable before class, just like I would in person. I make myself presentable after class, just like I would in person. I always tell my students, if you have 5 extra minutes to your day and you want to stay on and ask me questions, please feel free to do so, because I will stay on with you. I hold office hours, even though I'm not required to. I hold virtual office hours for my online classes. I do this at 7 o'clock at night, 7 to 8 p.m. once a week. And my students, I have a lot of times where I get on there and none of my students show up. And I have a lot of times where that one student who really needs to talk to me and just doesn't know how to ask that question over email comes and presents themselves. So developing that presence is kind of what I want to focus on. So we're going to have some opportunity for dialogue after each one of these P's of teaching. And so I want to know is how do you establish your presence with your students? This can be established at the very beginning of your online classroom. This can be established throughout your online classroom. This could be established as you're teaching. If you have that
Well,
hybrid model, go ahead.
Kirsten, one of the things that you had on there that I think is really important to think about, I'll turn my camera here, is at what point do you interject with your students? So did you already send a communication? That's something that I really enjoy doing, is kind of doing that introduction. So welcome to whatever class I'm teaching. This is, here's the syllabus, here's the expectations. And in my syllabus, I put, attendance is required, and they have flexibility in that, but it is part of their grade. Participation is required. It's explained in there how it's part of their grade. And yes, I have a 6-page syllabus, and yes, I do expect them to read it. And yes, we go through it the first night of class to make sure everyone has read that. And I've done that for the last 20 years, the whole time I've been teaching. But at the same time, that's part of establishing that communication. Like, are you reaching out to them before? And the other thing that happens sometimes is I've had colleagues who have said, well, my expectation is they come to class the first night and they have read 400 pages or they have read 200 pages. And that's lovely if we let them know, but it also kind of heightens the stress of our students. And we've already established that our students are feeling a little stressed out by all the things. So I think it's important to be sure you have those clear objectives and setting those up straight. I'm looking forward to seeing in the chat here, how do you establish your presence with your students? What are things you do? And I'll tell a little story here. My dad used to love to tell the story about his typing teacher who would walk into class the first day of class, and she was like 5'2", and she would take a phone book and she would rip the phone book down the middle and drop it on the floor, and then have another phone book and say, okay, anybody else want to try to do that? Again, we're talking my dad, and I'm going to say that I'm not in my 20s, so I'm a little bit older than that by a lot. And so, a whole different mindset. But that idea was saying that, yes, I'm 5'2", yes, I'm small in stature. Kirsten, to your point, yes, I'm young, but I know my stuff, and this class is going to be done. You're going to get what you need to get out of it. And I think part of that is just so important. Owning your expertise as faculty is so important, to say, you know what, I've earned the fact to be standing up here, and you come here to learn something. So it's your dime. It's your investment in your education. Let's do this journey together.
Yeah,
But I was looking for some comments in the chat there. I'm not seeing anything coming through. So
yeah, so how do you establish your presence with your students? And if you kind of don't want to share that, we can move on to the next one. But regardless of your overall level of concern, what is one aspect about entering the classroom as a college teacher, even specifically online, that gives you pause or even worries you a bit? So how I establish my presence with my students, I kind of already explained that, but like I start off with music playing. I try to log on early when I'm online. I always start off my classroom with a daily quote that has something to do with the content, because my content in my classroom is a very real life application. I teach communication. And I always start off with my upcoming assignments. That's kind of how I establish my presence on a day-to-day basis. I also have things like Amy mentioned, like my syllabus. I do an introduction. I also do things that I really introduce myself, because I want my students to know that I'm a person too, right? And I try to remain with that humanity, because I feel like a lot of my students, and I know I did this when I was a student, I put my instructors up on a pedestal, kind of, right? And we're people too. And so that also helps you establish boundaries, which we'll talk about later. But I know my biggest thing that gave me pause when I went into adjunct teaching was my age. And so I do teach students who are older than me. I teach students who are mothers, and I'm not a mother yet. I teach, students who are still in high school. Actually, I teach dual credit classes sometimes too. So I'm teaching a wide range. I'm teaching, people who are going back to school as adults, and I'm also teaching high schoolers as well. And then I'm falling somewhere in the middle, and I'm the expert. So, leaning into that expert position, like Amy was talking about, but also having that, establishing that you are a human too, you are a person too. So I am the expert in my field, but I might mess up on something virtually. The Zoom link might not work. And, what do we do? And so we're going to talk about having processes in place when we get to that, for
And
those
Kathy
things, but
posted, oh,
go
Kathy
ahead.
posted in the chat, fantastic. She said that she sends a text message with a short video of herself before the classes start. She wants students to know that she is not scary. And I know Kathy, you're not scary, you're fantastic. And I always want to tell them my job is to help them. And I love my job. And I agree. I love teaching. I love that aspect of my job. And our job is to help them grow.
Yeah, our goal should be to take them from a student on their way, on their journey. We are on their journey to take them from student to specialist, whatever that looks like for them, whether it's 1 semester, 2 semesters, 2 years, or past that.
And Brittany made a great point. There's always room to learn, even though we might have an expertise, but you guys know, I mean, if there are things that we do really well, and then there are things that we have growth in. And I think one of the things that is wonderful about teaching is you're always learning, because even for communications, and Kirsten, I know I've seen you go in and look and like, okay, I want to know what the latest research is. I want to know what the latest techniques are. I want to know. And in the equity space, that is an ever-changing field. So I always am looking at what is coming up now. Mike shared that he always starts off his class with a clinical experience story, icebreakers, what if, that's fantastic. Really getting that dialogue flowing. So thank you both for contributing.
Yeah, and I think that clinical experience stories, that's great, because that's really that application connection part as well, right? Again, we learn from our peers, and I think students learn from people who are in the field that they look up to as well. So I'm going to move us on. Thank you for participating in that dialogue to really our process. So we covered presence. We know that presence is important. We know that communication is important, but we're going to talk about communication a little bit more in our process. So organization, setting the framework. So when we're talking about process, our classrooms processes need to be organized, they need to be communicated, and they need to be consistent. So we all struggle with organization, and this can be really cumbersome when moving to online learning in a virtual classroom or that hybrid model, because digital students require more organization. Online classrooms require more organization. I don't know if you guys know that, but they do. When there were holes in my organization when I taught just in person, or when there were holes in my preparedness for class, I could really fill them in by leaning into my presence and leaning into my expertise. But online students require more structure and more organization in our processes, because when we do have direct and live contact with our students, the organization system that we use is what students look for. Or when we do not have direct and live contact with them, that organization students is their fallback. That's what they fall back on. When a student is out sick from your in-person class this semester, if you are teaching in person or teaching in a hybrid environment like me, and they miss that class content because they're out sick, which everybody is sick right now, they look to that organization in your processes to fall back on. And so they look for that next step. They look for what's happening now, what's coming up. And so this framework is typically set at a local level institutionally. So for example, I know Richland uses Canvas, ISU uses their own LMS system, learning management system. I know Amy uses Microsoft Teams to teach on. So your institution probably already has something set up that you might love or you might hate. But we utilize it to the best of our ability. And so students, all teachers, all faculty, really it's so we know where to find information, how to get communication, how to make sure that that relationship is as strong as possible. So, put in the chat for me, what are some of the frameworks that you use? And I'm going to keep talking, but what are some of the frameworks that you use? So when moving on, I'm going to start talking about communication, but I'm interested to know what are some of the other frameworks that are out there in terms of organization, like LMS systems specifically is what I'm referring to. But communication, how do we create that microwave communication in a 24/7 crockpot day? So I want to know how you guys do that. I know somebody said that they send out text messages, which I think is amazing. I know a lot of instructors who do text messaging. There's a lot of companies or third-party apps out there that you can use. I know like GroupMe is one of them for texting or reaching out to our students on an app. Canvas has an app for us, so our students can have that directly on their phones. I know, everything has an app now, right? So I know like Microsoft Teams, Amy uses that, and you can have that directly on your phone. But we live in a microwave society. Our students are even more into that microwave society than we are. But we only have 24/7, hours in our crockpot kind of day. We use Remind and Band. When online, I prepare a PowerPoint for each class and send it ahead of time, so students have to look at it ahead of time if they want. And we use Team Up, somebody said. Great. Thank you for sharing. So something that I do is I have auto email reminders sent out. This is something I just started doing based on some of my feedback from my students. So I have my auto email reminders sent out. So if a student or if I need to say something to my students, or I need to remind them of an assignment coming up or a test coming up, or I need to send something out to them before class, what I do is I do a send later email on Outlook, and I'm able to write that email and have it go out at the exact day and time that I want it to. And so that really is me being organized, right? Setting that framework and allowing for the opportunity for that to happen in advance. And then my students get it when they need it. And I'm not sitting there emailing my students. I'm at work, right? I'm doing stuff for our center, but my students are still getting that email from me because I've set that automatic email. I also leave my auto email on in terms of communication. So for example, if my students are contacting me, I have my auto replies on, letting them know that I will get to their question within 48 hours, because my students, I teach a wide range. And so especially with like my younger students, they really have a lot of anxiety about me not replying like that, right? That microwave society. And so just me having my auto reply on allows them to kind of take a breath and just know that, I recognize that they communicated with me and I will get back to them in a timely fashion. A lot of you probably have those boundaries and expectations set in your syllabus as well. But really having that good communication lowers resistance and it lowers frustration, even in that online environment. And once that communication is in order, then any problem your student might have can be solved, and it really helps lower their anxiety. And it also helps you as a teacher set boundaries. So that I think, that's something that is so important in the online learning environment. And then really consistency. So being consistent with that. I struggle with that, you guys. I'm really good at the beginning of the semester being organized and communicating with my students. And then, something else happens. A lot of you are your adjunct instructors, or, you teach full time at the college, but you have other duties and responsibilities outside of work. We all do. And that consistency is something that I know that I need to work at. That's one of my weaknesses, being consistent with my organization and communication. Go ahead, Amy.
And Kirsten, even more in in addition to the organization and communication, I tend to be a people pleaser. Like, I don't want students to feel that they can't engage. And so one of the things that I'm going to hope that you learn from my mistake, because one of the things that I did incorrectly in the fall semester was I was teaching on Teams. Everything was on Teams. I had a couple students who had issues with Teams, and they were very comfortable with ReggieNet, which is our ISU system. So I said, okay, well, I'll put stuff in both places. It created a ton of work for me. It did not increase engagement. It did not help the students learn. The students who asked for ReggieNet actually figured out Teams, but then it also caused confusion. So we have a lot of apps that we said here, like Band and Remind and Team Up and Google Classroom. Those are all fantastic, but I really encourage you, consistency is so important. If you're going to teach on Teams, teach on Teams. If you're going to teach in Google Classroom, teach in Google Classroom. If you're going to teach on Teams and have all your things go out through a Band or through a WhatsApp, do it. But just be sure that we're consistent, because that's when there's confusion, and that's when there's also frustration. Confusion does lead to frustration for our students. So I just wanted to kind of send that point home on consistency for organization, yes, but also consistency in do what you say you're going to do and then stick to it. And if somebody is a little uncomfortable and has to learn Teams or has to learn Kahoot or has to learn Google Classroom, that's okay. Give them the support they need, but don't try to be everything to everyone, because then that creates inconsistency, confusion, and frustration.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
felt I had to add that in.
No, absolutely. And having those list of expectations and what they can expect from, I have a list of what I expect from them and what they can expect from me as an instructor. And so I have to abide by that, right? And that's something that I struggle with and that I'm trying to learn and grow better and get better from every semester that I teach. Um, Excuse me, I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget anything out that I wanted to for sure mention. I'm watching my time here. So opportunity for dialogue. I want you guys to describe a thought or two about how you might help students of all types organize their classwork in a hybrid classroom. So a lot of classrooms, I believe, are in that hybrid format. I mean, I'm teaching, a class this semester that's in that hybrid format. So I'm teaching in person for a shorted amount of time, 50 minutes, which is a regular class time, but only twice a week. And I'm teaching, a lot of my class is still expected to have that digital component and that online component as well. So, what are some things that you do or some things that you want to do or want to start implementing that help students of all types of students, all ages, all students from different backgrounds and different access capabilities to organize their classwork in that hybrid classroom? So for example, I'm a post-it note kind of person that deals with life kind of as it comes with me. And I focus on individual tasks normally in a chronological order. So in the classroom that I've spent, years relying on my presence in the classroom and my skills in public speaking to cover over my lack of organization or consistency. During the pandemic and during this time, I began to use video in my classroom along with other options that Canvas provides me to organize all of my materials. And this kind of forced me to map out and plan ahead, which made me a better teacher. And I've since found that Canvas in its strict outline format constrains me sometimes. So I don't know if you feel that way about your LMS system. But I try to use a variety of other methods as well. But especially in this full online environment, that Canvas linear format seems to have helped my students. So even sometimes I find my LMS system to be constraining. My students sometimes need that linear format. And so, referring to that and having that organized and set up for them really helps my students in both my fully online classroom, my hybrid classroom, and, I guess kind of when I used to teach in person. Does anyone have any examples or a thought or two about how you might help your students? Or what are some things that you're already doing? If a student comes to you and says, I'm just so disorganized, or I can't seem to meet these deadlines, or if a student's struggling to meet deadlines and you reach out to them, what are some of the things that you utilize to help them, or some of the things that you say?
I think the big thing is empathy. There was a gentleman who this morning said we need to care about what the people you care about care about. And I think it's important to look at our students as individuals who, during our tenure with them, we care about their success. So what can we do to contribute to their success? And again, back to that idea of humanizing that role as their instructor, humanize that conversation about what is something that what's going on, what are things we can help with. One of the things that I always do, and I made it a part of their grade because I'm kind of that bad teacher like that, is they have to meet with me. They have to meet one-on-one with me every semester. I did this when I taught undergrad. I teach graduate now, and I still do it. That they have to have a one-on-one conversation. It does a couple things. One, it allows me to see their interest, who they are, all of those great things, but it also allows them to say, oh, I can talk to this person one-on-one. So I really think I get a lot out of that. And I actually, those of you who are adult educators in the room, I stole that from adult education a couple years ago. I heard somebody probably about 5 or 10 years ago now, because it was around 2008, so 13 years ago. that was one of the first things I heard. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. I need to do that. And so for the last 10 years, I've been doing that. It's been fantastic. Brenda in the chat says that she sends a message every Monday morning entitled, "What should I be doing this week?" And it provides focus they need, including deadlines for the week. That is fantastic. That's great. I've been teaching online for 20 years. Wow. Fantastic, Brenda. And the best thing I ever did was take online classes myself. It gave me a great deal of empathy for my students online. I agree. I took a Universal Design for Learning class in 2020 as I was going into teaching online or moving my course completely online. It had been a hybrid before. And yes, it gives you so much empathy to sit on the other side of that desk and really see what they're going through. Maria shared that I send emails stating that there are exercises for them in Google Classroom in advance, and then they are always in contact. That's fantastic.
Yes, that is great. And I love that idea. Amy, something that I do is that I like that you send them the email with deadlines and everything, what I should be doing this week. I go over what's due at the beginning of every live class. I have my due dates. Something that I do that's, really that consistency component is that everything for my class every single week is due by Friday at 11:59 p.m. Doesn't matter what it is. In previous semesters, I had things like my speeches were due before speech day because I didn't want to give any students an advantage over other students because, right, I have 3 students speeches on Tuesday and the rest of my students speeches on Thursday, and I didn't want my Thursday students to have longer than my Tuesday students to have their speeches done. And something that I found was that a lot of my students would have their speeches done or have their outlines done, but they just really needed to edit their outlines for typos and grammars and grammar, making sure that things were double spaced, making sure that their reference sheet was an APA, just tedious things that they needed that extra time for. And then I also found that it was confusing for some of my students because I had all of these little assignments due throughout the semester on Friday at 11:59 p.m. at the end of every single week. And then I had our big assignments, our speeches due before the speech day, and the speech day didn't always fall on a Friday. And so that was really confusing to my students. So consistency also really helps my students be organized as well, because if they're not typically an organized student or an organized person, they can always fall back on that consistency that I've already set in place in my process. So yeah, I think those things are great, and just being empathetic as well. Really meeting our students where they're at in their lives, right? Not expecting them to come to us, not expecting our students to, make education their first priority and make our class their first priority. They have other classes, they have other obligations, they have work, they have, younger siblings they're taking care of, they have children of their own, they have significant others, that they have to take care of. I was just out last week because my husband had COVID and I had to take care of him. And man, that was a big undertaking for me, Amy and Brittany now. So we all have other expectations. And so I think as instructors, we need to not expect our students to make our class their number one priority, and anything we can do to help them organize or be consistent, have that communication really just helps them. Brenda said in the chat, yes, I do the same thing. Students know in my classroom that my assignment deadlines are always due on Mondays at 11:59 p.m. So they have the weekend to get things done. You know what, Brenda, I like that. If it's a Monday evening, students know that there could be something due. Absolutely. So they always kind of check in. I like that you give them the weekend as well. So kind of moving forward on my time here, because we are short for time. We only have 8 minutes. And this might be, one of those presentations where you kind of have to download the slide deck and go through it. But the third P is product. So this is where you guys are the expert, right? You're the expert in your field. This is the part of the equation that you're probably the most comfortable with because you are the expert in your field. For core academic classes, most of you have higher degrees to establish that content level, but different courses have different demands. And so you're going to bring your unique skills, knowledge, procedure, knowledge, etc. to the classroom, and you provide your students with that hands-on experience because you've lived it, you've done it, you've breathed it, right? Especially in, for example, the CTE area, there's some flexibility with different formats and focus of your class content. And so we have to boil down that content to a manageable size. Content is king in the classroom, but your enemy is time. So that our students can leave with that framework that we talked about to becoming that student to specialist. And whether those skills and that framework that you're providing in your product are auto body skills or computer skills or accounting skills or welding skills or nursing skills, etc. You are, the expert. And so because you've not only helped them learn what you already know, you're also helping them learn and know how to add to it. So again, taking them from that student to specialist is where that product P comes in place. I don't want to spend too much time on that because I know you're all experts in your field. But what are some of your biggest fears or, biggest weaknesses or biggest challenges that you faced in the past about trying to bring your content expertise to the classroom? So you are all likelihood a content expert, meaning that you're fluent in the content skills and procedures that you're going to be teaching. But what are some of your biggest challenges that you face about trying to bring your content expertise to the classroom? I'm keeping an eye on the chat here.
I will say, believe it or not, Kirsten, because I know we're possibly 20 years different in age range. But when I was your age and I was teaching as well, I came right out of college, went into my master's degree and started teaching halfway through my master's degree and then have been teaching ever since. And I think some of it was that age and having that intimidation. But once I got over that, it was managing the time management, allowing that conversation to go, kind of what Mike just said, those war stories and time management, allowing you to have those conversations about what has happened, but also making sure that you're bringing your content expertise to the table. And I think the biggest fear about trying to bring your content expertise is making sure you're not, I don't want to be tooting my own horn. I don't want to be saying, hey, look at me, I'm fantastic. But I want to have that street credential that allows me to say, yes, I've walked where you want to walk and I've done these things. And this is why, you should listen to what I'm saying. So the fact of the matter is age is kind of irrelevant. It's an irrelevant number for a person because you can have a lot more experience as a 20 something if you took a different path than as a 40 something if they were on a different path. And I think we need to, as I said before, own that expertise. I have my direct supervisor preaches that to me all the time. He's like, Amy, you got to own your expertise. You've been doing this for a long time. Just own it. And I think that's a challenge sometimes for all of us, but I give you that advice that he always gives me, just own it. You guys, we all know what we're doing. We know our content areas, speak from that place. And then Maria, she's been teaching for 40 years. She has no fear.
I love that. I laughed so hard at that, Maria. I love that. You said that. No fears, even when moving through the pandemic, huh? Okay. So, Teresa says, I love my content, which is math. I guess my fear is that students do not love it as much as I do. And they have had so many bad experiences and get discouraged. Yeah, I think we find that a lot with those core subjects, right? Math, science. I have a fear, that my students, have so much communication apprehension that they physically have communication anxiety where they cannot speak in front of their peers. That's a whole different ballgame, right? I could go on and on about that, but thank you for sharing with me, everyone. So in terms of delivering that product, we have multiple different ways that we're moving in. Again, that traditional model of teaching doesn't really exist anymore. That school data system, placement, testing, or all of our schools or all of our institutions have at least a school data system. They have placement testing, we have word processing, we have online grades, we have internet, we have, online reminders, email, everybody's on their phones, everybody's on their tablets, everybody's on their laptops. So traditional and tech in the classroom, using videos and technology for activities to enhance your teaching, all of these things are unavoidable. So we have that traditional and tech in the classroom, which again is where it's kind of a hybrid model a little bit because you kind of bring that technology into the classroom. And that's where our students, remember on that survey that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, our students said that yes, they love having that in-person interaction, But they also said that when they did have in-person classes, that tech in the classroom was what was lacking. And so, if your classroom is in that model, that's something that we as instructors really need to get better at and meet our students where they're at. We also have the blended flipped delivering the product manner. And this is where our teachers are face-to-face frame, but then there's also that online component. So it's kind of like that hybrid model. Teachers still do use the group space component, which is critical, but now we have students who have not only activities and homework digitally, but they also have some actual instruction digitally as well. So for example, I use video to do a lot of my digital instruction. And so both of these lanes can be happening at once. I have, my in-person lectures, but then I also have some instruction that's digital as well. And so using digital and face-to-face instruction as two parts of the same whole and allowing those students to be independent with guidance in that same group space. So maybe your classroom looks like that. Maybe you're starting to move in to that techie teacher strong blend. So not only are you providing students with independence and with that guidance, but now they kind of have a little bit more independence because you have a real framework established for your students that they can go right to everything for the whole semester or the whole duration of your course, and they can read the directions, they can complete the assignments, they can turn it in. And you're using free tools or other tools that you have access to put this into practice. And this allows for a lot of substantial benefits. It allows for quicker feedback, more attempts for our students. The technology is helping us determine in that moment what our student needs, even though we're not in that moment. So again, we are representing or we are adhering to that microwave society by being able to provide quicker feedback, provide more attempts for our students, like, hey, you didn't get this right the first time, here's another attempt, here's a new math problem, right? So for example, if you assign a student a math problem in a textbook, you are being very individualistic about it. But if you assign a student math problems on an online platform of something that you've curated or created, it can allow for feedback and more attempts. So did the student get it right or wrong? Here's how you would do it right, student. And here's a new problem for you that's a lot like the old problem, but it still allows you to try again, right? So that technology is kind of, really our left arm and in this situation, or our third arm in the situation. And the technology is helping us determine in real time, that 24/7 crockpot method, what students really need. And so next we're going to talk about product, and we are at time. So I apologize for that, but I only have a couple more things, just some resources to go through. And then we can, if you have the time to stay on, I don't want to take time out of your day. If you need to log off, I completely understand. But do you curate or create your products? So curating your products are your teaching, your instruction, your learning, your assignments, your quizzes, your tests, your placement part of the P's. Taking something another teacher has done and using it for your own use. I really discourage you from doing this, because anything that you are curating for your classroom, you really want to try to be specific and adhere that to your digital instruction and your students, because you know those students. And if you are more of a creator, don't try to create everything, right? There's YouTube, there's all these great resources that I'm about to provide you in a second. There's tools like screencasting and webcasting and recording meetings and all these things that you can do to fit your students' creation. But as a general rule, you have a lot of these items at your disposal that's going to take about 90% of your ability to move your classroom into some sort of digital online instruction format and help you do that product portion. But then you really need to determine the last 10% of what you need to create. And so we're going to provide you with some really great resources. And this is called Bitmoji Classroom. It's something that I use in my classroom. You're probably familiar with this. A lot of teachers have really taken this on wholeheartedly. It really helps bridge that gap between that humanistic perspective and that digital online environment. I still use these even in my hybrid classrooms, even in when I'm teaching, in person. I still feel like there's this disconnect, even when I'm teaching in person, lecturing. And then I still have my digital component, right? I always will probably have a digital component to my classes that I teach, but I still feel like there's this disconnect between me as the instructor at the front of the classroom and all my students. And there's also a lot of limitations that we're still dealing with in the in-person classrooms, right? My students can't be within 6 feet of each other. They have to wear masks, so they can't show, facial expressions. We're still limiting that amount of feedback that I'm getting as the instructor and that they're getting from me, because I actually have to wear a mask too in my in-person classes, which is, needed for that safety portion, but it really adheres me from being able to interact with my students. So I still use this Bitmoji to help bridge that gap between my online digital component, which this is still providing a digital component, that tech in the classroom, and my providing that digital component for my students, and then having that humanistic component as well, because I have that Bitmoji that's, looks like me and dresses like me and moves like me with all the different pictures that I use. I also have this great resource that if you've never checked this out before, it's called Gameably. We used it for an online conference, and I've actually implemented it into my classroom to do something that I like to call Group Olympics, but it's a really cool resource. It's basically a gamification system. So I use it in adherence or in conjunction with my Canvas classroom, and it allows me to create games, allows my students to get awarded points for things. I use it for extra credit. I use it for our group. We have a group speech that my students do together, and if they participate, they get extra credit for their group. And sometimes it's just silly things for my students to get to know each other, like tell me about your pet or upload a picture of your pet, etc. But other times it's learning components or construction components. Also, if you've ever heard of Padlet, we utilize that a lot, and some of you are probably familiar with that. And you're going to have access to all of these resources. Again, like I said, I'm 4 minutes over, so I do apologize for that. But if you have any products that you really love that you've curated or created in your online classroom, I'd love for you to share that in the chat at this time. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. But this is all I have. So we will share the recording and the presentation following the session. Thank you so much. If you do have to jump off, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time today. And again, this is recorded. You can share out the presentation, and we will share all these resources as well. So if you have any questions or products that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear about them. And if not, then have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Email us if you have any questions or comments or concerns. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm kind of just hanging on here just in case anybody does have a question. Looks like everybody's logging off. So thank you so much, everyone. Again, we will be sending this information out. Have a great rest of your day.